Good morning and happy Saturday. Welcome to this week's Weekend Weird Files. If you've been listening to me for a while, you'll remember back in episode 6, the one about the urban legends in South Carolina, I talked about Julia Legree, who was buried alive and tried to claw her way out of the mausoleum. Well, I found another similar story, and that's what we're talking about today.
Triple M Studios proudly presents the Weekend Weird Files, and here's your host, the weirdest one of all, Andrea Lee.
In Pikeville, Kentucky, there's the legend of Octavia Hatcher. When she was 20 years old, she gave birth to her first child, named Jacob. That was in the early part of 1891. Well, sadly, little Jacob died almost immediately after being born, and his mom became depressed. But it didn't just stop there. Soon, she was in a coma. On May the 2nd of that same year, they thought that she had died, so being that it was getting hot outside, they buried her quickly. Because, I've talked about before, they didn't have, all the embalming procedures and that type of thing, so they had to bury their dead really quick. Soon after that, they started noticing that other people in that area was starting to go into a comas, but they weren't dying. They think now, though, that the people were going into a coma because it was either something like a disease caused from a mosquito bite or gases that were released by the coal mines that were close by. Well, soon they realized that poor Octavia actually may not have been dead, so they decided to exhume her body. And what they found was terrifying. Her fingernails were bloody, the inside of her casket was ripped to shreds, and her face was frozen in horror. And all of that confirmed that poor Octavia had been buried alive. Now, there's a lot of critics out there that say this never happened simply because there was no newspaper articles that talked about it. But there's one thing I haven't mentioned about Octavia, and that was that Octavia wasn't just anybody. She was a member of one of the county's most elite families. Her husband, James, owned thousands of acres of land in Pike County. Plus, he had made his fortune in timber and coal, so they were pretty well off. It's been said that the reason this wasn't reported in the papers is that it could have been bad business for the newspaper itself, or for bad business for the doctors and the undertaker that had pronounced her dead, because back then they didn't smear people's name through the mud like they do now when somebody messes up. If that had happened now, it would be traveling around the world on Facebook and Twitter and everything else. But back then they didn't do that kind of thing, so that makes a lot of sense to me. Now, even though James, who was her husband, outlived Octavia by 50 years, he never remarried. But there's a little story that I found about him. It said that when he died, a string was tied around his finger, and on the other end of that string was a bell, and that bell was above ground when he was buried. It was so that if he had been buried alive, he could ring the little bell. Well, that's it for today's Weekend Weird Files. Have a great rest of your weekend, and don't forget to keep it weird. Now, we'll be back Monday with an all-new full-length episode.